All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started this morning. Again, I always hate breaking up good conversation and fellowship. I think it's a good problem to have, really, that you want to talk with each other this much. But I also know that there's potluck, and if I held you over for that, probably just leave. So I get that. Got to go ahead and get started. So first things first, just wanted to give some further information about the funeral coming up. Visitation for the family will be on Tuesday, August 2nd from 4 p.m. till 7 at Chapel Hill Church of Christ. Funeral services will be conducted at 7 p.m., not 6, like I think it may have been mentioned. It's conducted at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, August 2nd at the Chapel Hill Church of Christ. And visitation will be up to 7 p.m. at that point. So, again, just wanted to make that correction just in case anybody was confused about the timing there. So there's that piece of information. If you got any other questions, you can come see me or someone that knows what's going on. So having said that, we're going to go ahead and get into our lesson this morning. And, how many ever weeks we've been doing this now, you see the title of the PowerPoint and you're thinking, finally, we're getting to what I thought this class was about this entire time. It does take quite a bit of, I feel like, build up and cover of so many other things to get to this point because, again, the evidence that's used for evolution includes a lot of geology, includes a lot of other things that really aren't dealing with living organisms and its development genetically. But I know we've also been watching portions of the film Is Genesis History. Today we will not be watching anything. You're just going to have to listen to me talk this entire time. Hopefully this is going to be interesting to you. But there's a gap between what we discussed last week, which was really the nail in the coffin as far as fossils are concerned. We talked about what was found and what's being found in fossils, which is, again, revitalized soft tissue within these fossils. Again, how really statistically and conceivably just not possible if these things are at the very youngest 65 million years all the way up to 250 million years old. And again, we covered that last week, that soft tissue that you actually got to see up there, and really talked about the back and forth reasonings for why that occurred. And really, at the end of the day, there's really no good answer for why you have soft tissue unless it's just not as old as they think it is. So having on from that, the video transitions to living organisms and talking about biology and talking about evolution and what genetic material can do for living organisms, not necessarily hitting a very crucial piece of information, at least in my estimation, when we're going through a study like this, which is what evolution is, how it's defined, really going through what makes evolution, and then how does life begin? Because that's the crucial question that they have to answer, and they don't have a really good one. I want to give you what answers they have so that you know what's out there. And I think that because obviously we have access to the internet, there's almost an endless amount of information you can go and look up yourself. But some of the things that I want to cover today will be things that you would most readily find if you typed in, how did life start? So I wanted to cover those things today. And so really this is, again, a gap filler between fossils that we just really kind of summed up, going into really looking into biological systems and how they function. And does it actually prove evolution, or does it prove design? So that's what we're doing today. So I guess really where we start is, what is evolution? That is the question. I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but there are three really definitions of what evolution is. The overarching definition of what evolution is means literally change over time. And again, I don't think anybody in here would protest that things change over time. Actually, everything changes with time because of the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. The chaos in the universe is ever increasing. Everything's slowing down. Energy's dissipating. Things are changing. This is a dynamic system. It's not static. Things are changing. So, in a form, we believe in evolution if that's what the definition we're using is. Now, a lot of times when evolution, that term's being used, this is what actually is meant. It's a combination of macro and micro evolution. Okay. Macroevolution is the major evolutionary change. The term applies mainly to the evolution of whole taxonomic groups over long periods of time. And taxonomic group, or that word taxonomic, it comes from taxonomy. This is literally just the naming system that man has come up with for all the different animals, how they're related. They come into phylum, family, groups, orders, genus, species, all those things you've probably heard before. They are naming systems to help rank and order them. This has been done by man, and it does change every so often when it better fits what it is that they find. It really kind of messed me up when I was in college. I went through herpetology, which is the study of amphibians and reptiles. I was a weird kid. I guess maybe typical for a boy. I wanted to find every lizard, every frog, every snake that was out there. I wanted to find it. And so that curiosity remained with me. I don't know if that kind of goes away for guys, but it didn't for me. I'd go and catch a snake or frog whenever. So when I got into college, when I figured out there was a class for such a thing, I got to take this. Just trying to demonstrate something here. We would have to memorize the genus and species names, which are all in Latin, by the way, of every amphibian and reptile that's within Tennessee. And what really confused me was that the American bullfrog, the genus name was Rena. And I memorized it as such. And then while I was in class, my professor, Dr. Butterfield, if any of you know him, Brian Butterfield, then you know. He was at Freed. Great guy. He still had the love for catching critters too, because he made us go do it. But he said, well, they've changed the genus name from Rena to Lithobates. And so now I'm just thinking, I've got all these names up in my head that I've got to remember for this test. And now I've got to reassign the bullfrog a much harder name to spell anyways. Rena was much easier than Lithobates. And now that's stuck in my head, and I'll never get rid of it. All that to say, when these species names are thrown out, when these genus names are thrown out, these are names given by man, and they are changeable. They do change when there's more information. This isn't a set in stone thing that sometimes, a lot of times, gets thrown to us as, well, this is just what it is because this species is connected to this species. Well, you just changed the name of one of them. That's awfully convenient. I'm getting kind of on a soapbox here. I'm sorry. Only to demonstrate what we're dealing with is a man-made system of naming. Now, when we look at these things, and we're going to look at this in much more detail in a later class, what we're doing now is trying to establish where life really began, how that's explained, versus really explaining what life is, how it's connected. Because look, there's a lot of things that are connected that are very similar. I think we can all see that, right? But anyways, that's what macroevolution is. It is a change of an overall type to another type. That's really what we're talking about. You're taking a fish and it's turning into a land-dwelling animal. Macroevolution, changing from one major type to another. That's what we're talking about. Microevolution, on the other hand, is an evolutionary change within a species or a small group of organisms, especially over a short period of time. These are phenotypic changes, outward characteristics that they can actually see changes in very short amounts of time within generations. This would be something like fur or coat color. This would be beak size, if you know about the Finch study of Darwin. Those types of things are microevolution, changes within the same organism, but they're not changing to a whole nother organism. They're not changing into a new type. You don't see horse going into dog kind of situation. You're seeing zebra versus something that's running in the Kentucky Derby. Those are microevolution. That's what we're talking about here in a very general sense. So macroevolution, when we're actually talking about evolution, when I say the word evolution, really talking about macroevolution. Okay, and I really want to establish that as we're going forward so that there isn't really any confusion on what we're talking about. Now, macroevolution is really, it's got some components that it uses to justify itself, or that scientists use to justify macroevolution. You have mutation of genetic material, you have natural selection, okay? Plus, billions of years, you have to have a whole lot of time, and I think we've really kind of established that's a huge need for evolution. You have to have the time for these things to create the diversity that we see, equals macroevolution. So these are the major components of what evolution is based upon. Now, natural selection and mutation. I want to cover these a little bit now so that you know what we're talking about before we get into the other components. These things will be discussed in much more detail because they need to be. Okay, but I want to give you just a simple overview of what they are now as we're going forward. So natural selection is the process by which living organisms adapt and change to better survive a given environment. Heard of the survival of the fittest? I think everybody's heard that. Expression of different phenotypes, just kind of talked about that. When you hear phenotype, all that means is a different outward appearance of the same thing. When you see, say, a cat, whether it has a white coat, black coat, calico, those types of things, those are different phenotypic characteristics of the same animal. That's all that's meant there. It's a fancy word just to mean you look different, but you're the same. It's kind of, that might have been a paradoxical statement. Anyways, survival of the fittest, what's meant by the word fit may not be what you think it means. Okay, fit means it is going to reproduce best. Okay, case in point, there was a type of beetle, and I think it might have been a dung beetle, I'm not sure, on an island that there was a recessive gene within this group of beetles that didn't allow some of them to fly. Their wings actually didn't work. And because of that, they stayed on the ground, and they actually better survived the environmental conditions because there were a lot of birds that were catching the ones out of the air. The other ones that stayed on the ground, for whatever reason, were better. Even though they had a recessive gene, they had less ability. They were still more fit for the environment to reproduce. Fit just means you are best fit for the environment with which you were in. That's all that means. It doesn't mean it's the biggest, fastest, strongest if that doesn't make you fit for the environment. Just wanted to clarify. Mutation, this is a change within the DNA sequence of organisms. Mutations can result from errors in DNA replication during cell division, exposure to mutagens, and other viral infection. This is a change in those base pairs that mess up what's going on within the DNA sequencing. So I know there's a lot of terms being thrown out at you. Mutation is something's going wrong with your DNA that's not supposed to happen, okay? Now, what's being assumed here is that natural selection on its own can't give you new information, okay? The genes that are within an animal that's being expressed once these DNA sequences are going on and it's expressing, everything that's about you and whatever it is that's being made, this does not introduce new information. Mutation is what gives you that new information. You can't actually change into something else if your genes are being replicated the same way over and over and over. So natural selection was believed at first by Darwin to be the only thing needed for macroevolution, mutation was actually then interjected, say actually mutation of genetic material is what's also happening with natural selection to give you this overall change from this type of organism, fish, to land-dwelling amphibian. So that's what these two things working in tandem do for evolution. Now, time. This is a really big component of macroevolution because these two other things that we were just talking about, natural selection and especially genetic mutation, all of these things are still unguided processes. These things are not, well, I'm going to go breed this specific dog with this specific dog to try to get a specific dog product out of it. That's not what's happening. Okay. Again, when I describe what fit means, it actually may just give you a whole bunch of beetles that can't fly anymore. And then when that environment changes, that mutation actually is not beneficial whatsoever. And then the beetles just get wiped out. Then they're gone. Natural selection, while there may be a hint of design in it, and really when you hear evolutionists talk about it, it's saying, well, they got these, characteristics to help them better survive the environment. It almost sounds like there's a design feature to it to help them survive in the environment, but there is no design behind what's happening. This is random chance. This is mutation that cannot be controlled. And again, when you think about it that way, this doesn't happen within a short amount of time. It can't, because statistically, mutations are really not beneficial. Most mutations are either benign or they really hurt you. So knowing that about scientists, if you stretch it over enough time, you actually expand the statistics for what could occur. That's why time is so important. Is that you've got to give enough time for these mutations to do the bad stuff, but then to maybe give you something beneficial, and enough small beneficial mutations coupled with natural selection give you what we see today. So again, life is believed to be started or have started at least 3.5 billion years ago. Now, you might want to ask yourself the question, how do they know that? How do you know it got started 3.5 billion years ago, or at least 3.5 billion years ago? Well, this was actually calculated by what we've already discussed through these sedimentary rock layers containing fossils and other igneous rock that's tested radiometrically. These things were calculated. Lava flows got stacked with sedimentary rocks containing fossils, and that's how they date these fossils as far as 3.5 billion years. What's interesting about this is that, again, this lava flow that's coupled with the sedimentary rock that holds the fossil, again, when I read some of the articles about this, is saying there's very few of these left because other lava flows have come in and contaminated the lava and has made it a lot less old. So these are very rare. They don't actually exist much anymore. And I thought, okay, there's more evidence pointing to it not being that old, yet you found the right sample that's going to give you the answer that you want. Again, it seems like you're interjecting to fit an idea or a paradigm. So that's how they get the time frame of when life actually started. So here's the question. Even if you grant them that, it's like, okay, all right, let's grant that. How did life begin? That's the big question that I want answered. Because there's not a lot of good evidence. There's actually very little evidence in support of what you're purporting. And there's a lot of evidence that life doesn't start from non-life. And this is established by the scientific community, and I'll show you that actually right now. Okay, so Louis Pasteur, has anybody heard of him? Yeah, kind of a famous guy. Interestingly enough, the term pasteurization kind of came from this experiment. Just a little fun fact for you. But Louis Pasteur conducted an experiment to help understand how life actually began, because for a very long time, it was believed that spontaneous life would just come into existence. If you left meat out, well, maggots would just appear within the meat, and then flies would come about. So there's this spontaneous life that would just occur, and that's just how life came into existence. So for a long time, that's what was believed. When science kind of started catching up, they thought, I want to understand this a little better. And there were two other experiments before Pasteur's that really kind of established this, but his really nailed it in the ground, and that's why it's the popular one. But this is what his experiment was. He took some broth, I believe it was some kind of chicken broth, and what they did was they pasteurized it, or they boiled it within this weird-looking little flask, this beaker, okay, to make sure that there was no microbes, any other living organisms within the broth once it's there. Okay, so you boil it, make sure it is sterile, it's done. Now, you see the one, oh yeah, you can't see on LED screens. The one with the really long, extended neck. Hey, thank you. It's a team effort here. That first one, that neck, was actually supposed to catch anything from dust particles. I mean, because really dust particles and other things floating within the air can actually carry bacteria and microbes to whatever is exposed in the air. So that's how, hey, I actually haven't touched this at all. How is this already molding? How is this already going rotten? Well, there's microbes everywhere. This neck would not allow the dust and those microbes to actually get to the broth. So for a year, it sat and no growth occurred. Pretty interesting. Now, he broke that neck off of the beaker, and within a couple of days, it has turned color. It is full of microbes because it was exposed to air and the dust particles floating in the air. Pretty putting to bed that spontaneous existence of life just coming out of nowhere doesn't really happen. No, life is coming from pre-existing life. Now, what's really interesting about this is what scientists have said about this experiment and the subject as a whole, okay? Now, Martin Moe, that's his last name, said this: a century of sensational discoveries in biological sciences has taught us that life arises only from life. Now, I want to also establish this because I didn't have enough room. I didn't have enough room to give their titles, but all of these are a form of evolutionary atheists. These are not people that believe in what we believe. Okay, these are evolutionists in some form or fashion. So Martin Moe had that to say about it. George G. Simpson said, quote, "There is no serious doubt that biogenesis is the rule, that life comes only from other life, that a cell, the unit of life, is always and exclusively the product or offspring of another cell." Now, I think I might have, yes, I kind of skipped over this. The law of biogenesis, okay? I want to state this here as we're going through what the scientists are saying. The law of biogenesis states that life must come from pre-existing life. That's pretty hard to overcome if your entire belief system hinges on the fact that at some point life came from non-life. How do you explain this? Especially as a scientist, if you're wanting to convince me that science can tell us everything that we need to know, I need to know why you go against one of the laws, one of the few laws in biology that was established through this experiment. That's why I actually brought up Louis Pasteur's experiment and what scientists say about it. So again, he said that there is no serious doubt that biogenesis, that life coming from pre-existing life, is the rule. Now, Moore and Slusher wrote in their book, Biology, A Search for Order and Complexity, historically, the point of view that life comes only from life has been so well established through the facts revealed by the experiment that it is only called that it is called the Law of Biogenesis. They're saying in their book that it has been established so well through experiment that it is a law. This is not a hypothesis. This is not a theory. This is something that just is. That's pretty strong language, again, for something that kind of flies in the face of what it is that starts your entire belief system. One thing I wanted to do very quickly. Oh, we got time? We're at 11:23. We're good. I'm going to get you out of here. I'm very confident that we're going to get out of here. Yeah. We'll get out of here, I promise. There was one other quote that I wanted to read you guys. You know what? I'll say that to the end. We're going to move on just in case I get close to the end. I don't want to take up any potluck time. Okay, so here is the answer to that question. How did life begin? These are a couple of the answers that you will find if you search wherever it is that you want to search, whether that be in a library or online. Okay, so the one, I guess, on my left, your left still, if you're looking at it that way. Yeah, on the left. The Miller and Yuri experiment. This is the experiment that always gets brought up that proves this is pretty much how life existed. Okay, so, or came into existence, rather. So what this experiment did, what they did was they combined what they assumed to be the atmospheric components of that time, of however far back in time that they chose. Okay, they took methane, hydrogen, ammonia, and water vapor. So they took water, methane, hydrogen, ammonia. They assumed that was the atmosphere. Again, take that into consideration. Second, they subjected these chemicals in a flask. They combined these in a flask and subjected them to electrical stimulus to replicate lightning. So lightning striking this flask of atmospheric chemicals producing amino acids. Now, I know a lot of you have probably heard of amino acids, kind of know what they are. You've always heard them as the building blocks of protein. Yeah, of course, they're very important. You don't get a lot with just amino acids. You have to assemble them in the right way to make proteins, and then you have to assemble proteins in the right way to get a cell. And you still have to activate these proteins to act in conjunction with one another. This does not, by any stretch of the imagination, show how life began. There's no explanation for how these amino acids became protein. We're okay. We got time. I'm mostly talking to me, not you. But you don't have any explanation for how these amino acids combine together to make the protein to then form the RNA, which is what most evolutionists would say was the first kind of DNA that really replicated the first cell, the single cell organism to exist. Okay, there is nothing there. And there has been alternate explanations that have come out because this does not actually cut it. Plus, this was done actually pretty far back, either the late 50s, early 60s. So this was kind of an outdated experiment, but this is still the one that's pointed to because really isn't a better explanation. Now, if you just go and you look up how life started, this was literally the first article that came up. And it was so interesting, I just had to share it with you guys, and especially the admission that they gave within the article, okay? So this one was labeled Ancient Cataclysm. So this is how life may have started. This was a new hypothesis of how life began. So basically a big meteor carrying a bunch of iron and other metals struck the earth early on, okay? basically left a whole bunch of metallic material in the atmosphere that rained metal apparently for quite a long time, left big rust spots on the Earth, oxygen combining with the iron stripping off the oxygens, only leaving hydrogens, talking about water. Now you've got this big hydrogen-rich atmosphere, and under this atmosphere, this is literally what it says, after things cooled down, organic molecules began to form under the hydrogen-rich atmosphere that then led to the formation of RNA. There's a lot of details missing there. Okay? There's a lot of details missing. That's important. Because, again, this is all just I think this probably could have happened. Now, I want to read you verbatim what the article said. Okay? Now, that scenario, what we just covered, captivated participants at an October 2018 conference here where geologists, planetary scientists, chemists, and biologists compared notes on the latest thinking of how life got its start. No rocks or other direct evidence remain from the supposed catalysm. Its starring role is inferred because it would solve a bevy of mysteries, says Stephen Benner. Oh, that's why you've brought this up, because it would answer a lot of your questions. It would solve a bunch of your mysteries, yet there are no surviving evidence. How convenient is that? I thought this was science. I thought this was something that's based on evidence, but there's not. Again, I'm not trying to be too harsh here, but if you're going to tell me that this is a science-based belief and you throw me something like this, it's not science. It's not. That's you coming up with, in your own mind, your best explanation for how your belief system could have occurred in the absence of a God that creates life in an instant. Okay? I give you this because if you don't go and you search some of this stuff out, I had to read the article, but they give you the the damning piece of evidence right there for themselves. They really kind of conflict themselves right here in their own article. I want to read it again. Its starring role, it being this explanation, its starring role is inferred. It's inferred because it would solve a bevy of mysteries. Well, again, all I got to say to that is not science. That'd be great. But if you have nothing besides what you thought up, I'm not going to put any stock in that. So I know this was a lot, but, and that was second bell. So last slide. I'm getting better. If there are any comments or questions, obviously, please feel free to ask. If you want to talk to me about it, after. I know I don't want to make you late for, again, what is, I'm sure, one of the best meals you can get in town. But if you do end up having any comments or questions on this, please come to me at any point in time. I can give you these articles. You can read them for yourself. But we're going to move on to, again, more evolution-based discussions and studies. From here on out, we're kind of leaving rocks behind, but I had to give you this before we moved into the next section because I feel like it really addresses a major gap. And this is really one of my strongest arguments and beliefs when I was faced with the dilemma, because searching and trying to find my own faith, and again, at Freed, one of my professors said, I want you to become an atheistic evolutionist for a week. Try to prove it right. I'll be honest with you. I felt relieved. I felt like, hey, I get to go and see if this is right. I get to go see if what I've believed either is real or it's actually not really supported. And from my own findings, there was a lot more solid evidence for the existence of God than there is for evolution, especially because of this right here. How did life begin? You don't have a good explanation for it. There's a lot of, for lack of a better term, there's a lot of made up reasons for it because they don't know. And it's really hard to know what happened billions of years ago when you have nothing left from a billion years ago. So, okay. That is it. I will stop. We'll get you on your way. I'll say a quick prayer and get to the food. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for all the many blessings that you've given us. We are so grateful for, again, your creation, showing us through your handiwork that you are alive and well, and that you are the ultimate power in the universe. Lord, we're so grateful for our lives. Help us to, again, be good stewards of the blessings we have. Help us to be a blessing to others this week. Help us to be the solution for other people's problems. And Lord, when we are falling short, we rely on your forgiveness, and we're so grateful for that. Lord, we are so grateful for your Son. We are most grateful for the sacrifice he gave for us that allows us to have forgiveness. We're so grateful for him and to you for giving a portion of yourself in love to us. We ask all of this in your Son's most wonderful, matchless, and high name. Amen.